What if we looked at the Bible not as a book about religion or even spirituality, but a profound account of the evolution of human consciousness and the development of your own mind? We begin at the very root of this journey with a look at the story of Adam and Eve. And the first crucial step is to ask the question, is the story of the Garden of Eden literal? Did these things really happen as written? And when you look closely at the details, such as the idea that the entire world is filled with suffering and war and disease because two people ate a single piece of fruit, or that one of the main characters is a talking snake, you realize it's extremely important to conclude that this story cannot be literal. Snakes do not talk. And I could go on and on with other examples, but because of this, I'm looking at these elements as more like allegorical signposts guiding us toward a deeper truth. And once we accept that it's not literal, we can then explore some ideas about what these symbols actually mean. Let's move on to the Garden of Eden. The setting for this beginning is the Garden of Eden. The word Eden itself means delight, peace and love. So what if the garden is not a geographical place, but a primordial state of unconscious harmony that resides within you? The garden is also allegorically linked to the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the creative part of your mind, the place of intuition, of holistic thought, of natural peace. This inner sanctuary is where true creation happens and where no stress or fear can enter. This concept is emphasized by the garden's orientation. It is planted eastward. This direction consistently symbolizes the dawn of light, the source of wisdom, the location of the highest consciousness. Biblical texts confirm this link, as seen in Genesis 2:8. Now the Lord had planted a garden in the east, in Eden. Or Ezekiel 43:2, and behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. In Ezekiel 43:4, the east, the right side, is a source of inner delight. And what does delight mean? Eden. Furthermore, the entire creation narrative with its 7 days is often linked to the 7 chakras. The 7th day, the Sabbath or rest, mentioned in Genesis 2:2, and on the 7th day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work. Symbolizes the achievement of this final state of perfected peace at the top of the 7 chakras, so the garden could mean that inner place of rest, where no burden can be brought, the only place within you free from stress, from fear and guilt and anger and so on. The first character we encounter is Adam. To understand him, we must look beyond the English name to its ancient origins. The concept of the first man, the beginning of life, has very deep roots. We can look back to ancient Egyptian times. The first man who came into being was named Atum, A-T-U-M. So Atum to Adam is not a big leap, especially when we think about people named Adam or Eve in the East 2,000 years ago. It's clearly not the case. Now back to Egypt, and in the beginning there was only a dark, chaotic ocean called Nun, and Atum emerged from Nun, rising onto the primordial mount. But Atum was alone, and to begin creation he performed an act of self-creation whereby he spilt his seed, to bring forth the first pair of deities, etc., etc. And the idea of the primal source also be connected to the most basic building block of all matter, without going into quantum particles, the atom. Adam, atom. Perhaps the name Adam points directly to the atom. Adam is a human being viewed initially as the physical foundation, the raw material, the internal burst of energy from which everything else flows. There is also the thought that Adam represents the nucleus of the atom, which provides the core identity and mass of the atom. And Eve means EV, which is an electron volt, or even just an electron. The nucleus, Adam, is positive due to protons, while the electron, Eve, is negative. So their relationship is defined by a strong, attractive fundamental force. Now the separation of the electron from the nucleus is a physical process called ionization, and this represents the universe's transition from a state of singular inert potential, the neutral atom, Adam, to a state of dynamic charged interaction, the ion and the free electron, Adam and Eve, making all subsequent complexity possible. This mirrors the transformation from Adam's singular existence to the duality of Adam and Eve. The power responsible for this creation is also fundamentally important. In the original ancient language, the divine name or God is Elohim. This is a critical point because Elohim is not a singular word, but a plural word, a multiple. Elohim represents the essential male and female principles integrated into one source. You cannot have creation without this duality, this balance of opposites. We need a man and a woman to create a new life. There's matter and antimatter, light and dark, yin and yang, North Pole and South Pole. The Bible explicitly confirms this duality in Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Is this why the creation of man necessitates a split into two functional aspects, the physical and the mental? The entire system is built on this balance, even down to the question posed later in Genesis 3:22, where God says, "The man is become as one of us," referencing the plurality and duality inherent in Elohim. So with the foundation of Adam, the physical, the next step in the evolution of consciousness is inclusion of the mind. Eve is a symbolic representation of the mental process and intellect. And as most of us know, the allegorical separation of Eve from Adam is described in the famous rib story found in Genesis 2:21-22. "And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman." Now again, this doesn't sound like a literal event, but is perhaps an ancient symbolic depiction of how life evolved. If you look at the word rib in ancient Hebrew, it can also mean side, which would mean that he took one side of Adam, which also makes me think about the splitting of the atom and the huge amount of energy that would create, maybe representing that initial burst of energy I mentioned earlier, or the separation of energy into the physical and the mental. And if taken this way, then the split is what allows consciousness to develop from a purely physical state into a state of complex thought. The physical part Adam now exists alongside the mental part Eve. Is this the beginning of humankind? So what ends up happening? The harmony of Eden is broken by the serpent. We can look at the serpent not as a reptile, but the symbolic representation of the lower carnal instinct, the physical self and its subtle demands. Genesis 3:1 emphasizes this, stating, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field." Subtlety means clever or cunning. So the serpent represents the urges and primal drives that arise from that lower physical part of your system, often visualized as a spinal energy. It speaks to Eve, the mind, dictating immediate impulse. You always get these feelings from this lower part, and the serpent provides the idea of how to carry out these feelings, those urges. And I'm sure you have been spoken to by the serpent, that voice urging you to neglect things or to eat junk food or just anything to get that immediate gratification. How did this begin? The temptation was to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This act is the mind's choice to abandon unified consciousness and dive into dualistic judgment. The mind begins to categorize everything as good or evil, and this mixing of good and evil creates immediate confusion in the mind. When you operate from the knowledge of good and evil, everything gets integrated and entangled into a confusing mess. You are pulled in the opposite directions because the mind is no longer drawing direction from the pure delight of the right side, but from the messy judgments of the rest. The immediate primary consequence of this act is the realization of their nakedness. They began running around looking for fig leaves to cover themselves up, which again doesn't sound very real. So I think this symbolizes the psychological birth of shame and of guilt. They go running to find these fig leaves because they feel exposed. The entire point of the story centers on the question that God poses in Genesis 3:11. Who told thee that thou wast naked? This question is paramount. It implies that the guilt, the shame, and the feeling of being sinful was not imposed by God. It was created by the mind when it listened to the lower instincts of the serpent and adopted a dualistic judging view of the self. Systems and institutions of the world act as this lower serpent, continually telling you that you are guilty or naked, forcing you to run around trying to cover up every exposed part of yourself. The original sin is interpreted not as a single transgression, but as dwelling in your emotional nature, especially those lower, awful emotions, a state of separation from the inner garden of delight, of Eden. So this story of Adam and Eve is the essential human epic, the evolution from a simple physical core to a thinking being that then falls into the trap of its own judgment, creating guilt and confusion that unfortunately define the human condition. Although if we become aware of this, then maybe we can do something to change it. Although I wouldn't recommend starting to run around naked. keep those fig leaves on. I'm going to end it there, and thank you guys for watching as usual. Please like, comment, subscribe, and until then, I will see you next time.